We are celebrating Tandy, and since we've covered the Model 1 and now the Network 2 controller, we're going to take the next logical step and take a look at the TRS-80 Model 3 right here on Vintage Geek. Just a quick reminder, if you like vintage tech, vintage computers, especially Tandy products, be sure to like and subscribe. It's going to help us a lot, and I encourage you to become a Vintage Geek member. You can do that at our website at vintagegeek.com. Recently, we covered the TRS-80 Model 1 here on Vintage Geek, and it was a really fun machine and a great example of some of the first computing products to come out of the Radio Shack Corporation. Now, of course, this was their first attempt at a personal computer, and the engineers at Tandy were already seeing some of the shortcomings of the system and some ways that they could improve it over time. And ultimately, that's what led to the creation of the Model 3. Tandy and Radio Shack kind of went two different directions with their product line. For the Model 2, they went in a full business direction, making a computer that was really suited for a high-end business environment for things like running spreadsheets and payroll, general ledger programs, and a whole lot more. Going more in their home computer line and things designed for home use, they went with the Model 3, which is what we have here today. Now, the Model 3 is actually one of my personal favorites as far as design of these early computers. I love the way the Model 3 looks. It's an all-in-one design. It looks kind of 70s sci-fi in a way. I just like the way that the whole thing is put together. Now, I've read that Radio Shack had a lot of problems with the Model 1 about RF interference. Now, the rumor was that at the time you could actually take one of those Model 1 computers, and if you put an AM radio anywhere near it, you could actually hear sounds coming out of the machine. That's how much RF was essentially bleeding out of the computer. In order to meet the more stringent requirements that were coming out from the FCC, Radio Shack really had to change the design of how they were doing things, especially when it came to the video signal and so forth. And I think that's why they ultimately ended up going with an included monitor that was part of the same case. They could really control that RF environment a lot better. Now, there were actually multiple advantages because of the way they built this. One of them was that you only had to use one power cord for the entire system, which sounds silly, but when you think about it, if you had a TRS-80 Model 1, and then you had the expansion interface, and then you had a floppy disk, maybe a second floppy disk, and you had a cassette, you're talking about 5 power adapters that needed to be plugged into the wall just for this computer to work. You could get one power cord with the Model 3, and you get the monitor, the computer, you get 2 disk drives built in, and pretty much everything you need. Other things Tandy included with the Model 3 were a lowercase character set for the keyboard built in, so you didn't have to do an additional chip or add on something to the system to make that work. They added a number pad, which you could do with the later Model 1s, but was not standard on the first generation. They also added disk drive support right out of the gate. You could have the disk drives in the physical unit when you bought it. Now, of course, that made the price a little bit more expensive, but being able to have those included was definitely an advantage. You also had a slightly faster Z80 processor design for the Model 3. It had built-in RS-232 for communications purposes, and you could have more memory overall. I believe you could do up to 48K in the Model 3 system, which was more than the Model 1 could handle by default. So they really took a few steps forward with the Model 3 and improved upon what they had already designed and made it even more appealing for the home and business user. Now, the price of this system ranged from $700 approximately all the way up to $2,500 depending on what options you got with it. But the baseline model was still very affordable and comparable to other computers at the time, made it very competitive. And as we talked about before, Radio Shack had an entire network of stores across the country, which made it much easier to get into a computer rather than having to go to a specialized store in perhaps a big city, whereas Radio Shacks were in all sizes of towns. So they definitely had an advantage going in, and they sold quite a few of these. I don't have any experience with the Model 3 from when I was younger, but I do remember it well. I was actually in elementary school. I was in the 6th grade, I believe, and I was asked to help another teacher that was helping with some computer lab projects in another part of the building. And I was shown a computer lab that had older computers at the time that were no longer being used. And I remember very distinctly seeing a Commodore PET sitting on one of the desks as well as a TRS-80 Model 3. And I was absolutely fascinated by it at the time. Now, of course, by that time, we were already using IBM PS2 type systems in the computer labs, more modern systems that ran DOS and everything else. So I had never seen a computer like the Model 3, and I really wanted to get it to work at the time, but we couldn't even find the software for it back in those days. It was a fun memory to have, and I'm actually really excited to be able to turn on this Model 3 today and actually get to use it for the first time. So this should be a pretty exciting adventure here on Vintage Geek. Talking a little bit about the hardware of the Model 3, the keyboard itself is improved from the original design. As we talked about, there was a lot of keyboard bounce where you'd have the repeating keys on the Model 1. They pretty much all but eliminated that that in the Model 3, and you can actually tell in feeling the keys that they definitely feel a little bit different. One thing that's different about the Model 3 is all the way at the right-hand side of the keyboard is a red button that's used as the reset switch. That's kind of a convenient way to load software if you put a new disk in the drive. You don't have to physically power off the machine. There's also a badge below that reset button that tells you a little bit more about the system, specifically how much RAM is installed. Now, this particular Model 3 has 48K of RAM installed in it, which would have been the top end of the configurations for the machine. As far as I know, this one is all factory original. We have not done any replacements on it. It has the original disk drives. There were a lot of aftermarket components available for the Model 3. One of the things that was an add-on that I thought was kind of cool was the anti-glare screen filter that could be put over the front of the chassis, and we actually have one that has this. The cool thing about that is that it kind of makes it look like the text is floating in the background, which is kind of a neat feeling. There were a lot of different models of the disk drives that could be used in this system. In one of the other ones we actually have two half-height drives that are in the same slot as one of the full heights in this one. So there were different configurations you could buy, a lot of aftermarket components. These machines were in service for a number of years, so it's no surprise that other manufacturers made parts for them. That really helped extend their life in the field. Other than that, it's a pretty basic design. You've got your CRT in the front, you've got your two disk drives on the right, just above the keyboard area. You've got some ventilation across the top of the unit. It really looks great. You can put it on just about any desk and it really stands out, and really love having this here in the Vintage Geek collection. On the back of the Model 3, there isn't really too much to talk about. It's where the power cord, of course, comes into the system, and there's also the standard DIN connector for the cassette that you would see on any of the TRS-80 models. It's important to note that the cassette functionality was essentially the same as the Model 1, with one key difference, and that is the inclusion of the higher 1500 baud rate by default. We talked about that when we talked about the Network 2 controller. The Model 3 was also compatible with the Network 2 controller. Moving on to the bottom of the unit, there's a serial port that I believe comes out with the DB25 connector. I think there was other things you could do with the edge connectors to connect to printers and other peripherals, but there is what appears to be a good deal of expansion capability. One thing that's fun about this particular Model 3 is that we have not had to do anything to this machine. It worked perfectly fine out of the box. We do have the original box for it, and more importantly, the original factory Radio Shack seal is still intact. So according to Justin, we can just take this right back to Radio Shack if there's a problem.
Radio Shack provides total service and support. I'm convinced.
Tandy computers at Radio Shack Computer Centers.
That's pretty much it for the physical design of the Model 3, so I think it's time to do some testing. I'm going to start out with putting in the standard TRS-DOS disk that would have come with the system. This is a copy of the original disk, but it should work exactly the same. Now, as I understand it, you're supposed to turn the system on first before you even put the disk in the drive. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to put the disk in, and we should be able to hit this reset button and boot the system. And it did scan the second drive, and here we go, TRS-DOS Model 3. I like the little graphic representation of the computer at the top. That's pretty cool. It gives you a version number here. This is from 1981, although the Model 3 was first made in 1980. Shows that it has two drives in it. Gives you the serial number, which is kind of handy. It's asking me for a date, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in now. How about June 1st of 1982? We'll put in time. I'm just going to put that it's 12 o'clock. The Model 3 actually did include a real-time clock, which was a new feature for this model. And now we've got TRS-DOS ready. I assume that it has a directory command, so I'm going to start with that. Oh, and here's our list of contents on the disk drive. Looks like we've got 3 different files here. Not really going to spend a lot of time with TRS-DOS. I just wanted to make sure that the machine boots up as it's intended. Also, interestingly enough, this disk has a date of 1986 on it, so this must have been a copy that was made several years after the fact. What I'd like to do now is spend a little bit of time, as I do with most systems we cover here, and do a quick review of some educational software. We have another one in the series that we tried on the Model 1. This one's from the company Random House, and this one's on telling time. So let's give this a try on our Model 3. Random House Telling Time. This is from 1983. Press enter to continue. Type your first name, and of course we're going to go with Vintage. I like that it automatically capitalized the first letter. That's pretty intuitive. We got 3 lessons here. We've got the hour clock, half-hour clock, and quarter-hour clock. Let's just go straight to lesson 3. Why not? All right, so we got 3 different games we can play: practice clock, timeout, and stop. How about practice clock? Well, yeah, let's see an example. Why not? Oh, that's a pretty sweet looking clock right there. Time on the clock is 6:30. Move the arrow to 6:30 and press enter. Oh, easy enough. All right. Right, yay. All right, let's begin the lesson. All right, looks like we got 6:45. Got that in the list here? Right, perfect. Got 8:30. Now what happens if we put the wrong thing in? Let's see what that does. Let's just say it's 6:45. no try again. So it's just going to give you the chance to get it right the second time around. Everything's very fluid, things are moving quickly, there's no real lag or latency. The clock looks decent for what it is. Obviously you've got a limitation on resolution on the screen, but it certainly represents what needs to be represented here. I don't know how many questions there are in a given lesson. It gets a little bit hard to see sometimes where the arrows are on the screen. Now this one looks like we got 3:15, but you can barely see the hour hand just because of the way the characters are put together. And 1 o'clock. So it didn't count the one that I got wrong, even though it gave me a second chance to get it right. So it gave me 9 out of 10, 90%. Honestly, very basic, but it really does get the job done. I'm sure if you were teaching a unit in a classroom on telling time, this would be very helpful. Definitely a good example of an educational piece of software. I'm impressed so far. Moving along to something slightly less educational, I wanted to play a classic arcade game for the Model 3. Now we have a copy of Frogger here in the library. Of course, it's iconic, it's a classic. It's the official TRS-80 version of Sega's arcade game Frogger. Gameplay that is faithful to the original coin-op version. It has exciting real-time graphics, advancing levels of difficulty, and a high score screen. Let's see what this looks like on the Model 3. The official Frogger by Sega. Interestingly, when we looked at the Model 1, this looks like a similar load screen, but it doesn't have the timer that you would have for the cassette interface because the disc is quite a bit faster, so that's just one of the additional features of the Model 3. Let's go ahead and load the game by hitting L. All right, looks like there's a high score already on the disc. 22,000 looks like. Let's hit clear and get the directions really quickly. Move Frog vertically or horizontally using arrow keys or keys A, Z, K, or L. Safely maneuver Frogger to its home within the allotted time. Cross the highway without getting run over and cross the river without falling in. Traffic, snakes, crocodiles, and diving turtles is what we're trying to avoid here. You get 10 points for each safe jump. You can beat the timer, you get 10 points per the beat. You also get an extra frog awarded every 10,000 points. It looks like you've got your commands here to end the game, hold the game, or resume play. Let's give it a shot. One player. We'll just start at skill level 0 to get the hang of it. All right, here I am. Okay, all right. Uh-oh. Oh no! The animation of getting run over is fantastic. It's very rudimentary, but the movement is good. It's doesn't seem to have any lag or anything noticeable there. Moving left and right will probably help out quite a bit. Let me try that. Oops, jumped too soon, I guess. Caught the tail end of that guy. Nope, that didn't work out. I'm really killing it so far. I went down instead of up. Went way too soon on that one. Gotta use a little patience here. Of course, it is timed. Yay! Made it to the second screen, all right. Oops, I got a little bit too anxious there. You cannot touch any part of the obstacles. Thought I had it. No. Come on. So far I've managed to get 560 points. It's not very impressive. Let's see how ridiculous this is on skill level 4. Oh god. Oh, interesting. So the bottom row is actually speeding up and slowing down. Not that it helps a player like me. I can't even get past the level 1 in this thing. It's a little frantic at level 4. Oh no, there's too much animation for the frog dying. How about skill level 2? Make this a little bit easier at least. Yay! Wait, what? Did not realize that was an obstacle. Oh no. Well, if we've learned one thing today, it's that I am not good at Frogger. But this game looks really great on the TRS-80 Model 3. I'm impressed with what they've done here with the limited graphics capability. Having the ability to make something that's fun, interactive, and that's pretty fast-paced is pretty cool. And I'd say it's pretty true to the original arcade port from what I remember. I never really played the first version of Frogger in the arcades. Obviously, as you can tell, I haven't played Frogger much at all. But it looks good on the system. I'm impressed with it overall. I like the Model 3 in general. I like that it's all in one unit. Another great machine to have in the Vintage Geek collection. Which reminds me, if you're into vintage technology, vintage computers, and especially Tandy and Radio Shack products, be sure to like and subscribe. It's going to help us a lot as we grow. And I encourage you to go on our website and consider becoming a Vintage Geek member. As a member, you get special perks like discounted admission to the museum. Be sure to check it out and consider becoming a member at vintagegeek.com. Until next time, I'm Aaron, and this has been Vintage Geek.